Hey everyone, welcome to the Mountain Ascent Association's live broadcasting seminar of climbing Mount Whitney. I'm Darren. I'm grateful to have you with us online tonight. Thanks for coming. Tonight we're going to talk about the highest peak in the continental U.S. This is Mount Whitney down in the Sierra Nevada outside of Lone Pine. It is an ultra-prominent peak. It's got 10,000 feet of prominence, which means it puts it at the top of the lists. The 81st most prominent in the world and the second most prominent in the United States. So it stands out for lots of different reasons. It is a 6,600 foot ascent. The summit is about 14,500, and that's considered high altitude. Anything above, say, 10 or 12,000 would be such, where oxygen is diminished up there. Our recommendation is if you're going to climb Mount Whitney, plan ahead at least 3 days, and please plan ahead for permits. It's a really popular place. So let's talk about some fun facts first about Mount Whitney. It's located only 76 miles from Badwater, which is the lowest point in the United States. So imagine that, the highest point and the lowest point in the United States are separated by only a few miles. And the exact elevation has risen over time with advances in technology. So at one time it was thought that it was 14,494, but now the latest that I heard of, it's 14,505. So perhaps it'll keep getting taller as we go into the future. Mount Whitney, not surprisingly, is the most climbed high peak in the Sierra Nevada and also one of the most climbed in the United States, probably up there with places like Mount Washington and Mount Rainier. The 22-mile Mount Whitney Trail is the most popular. It gains about 6,000 feet from the bottom to the Whitney summit, and that would be from the Whitney portal to the top at 14,500. Some other fun things to know about this area is that there is an ultra run that goes from that lowest point in the United States to the top of Mount Whitney. It's 135 miles, and they do it in July on purpose. I also wanted to relate to you this nice little quote here that's on the PowerPoint. John Muir, after the first ascent of the Mountaineers route, said, "Well-seasoned limbs will enjoy the climb of 9,000 feet required for this direct route, but soft, succulent people should go the mule way." And yes, he was talking about the trail. There's some interesting history about the naming of Mount Whitney I'll get into here, but one of the peaks that's close to it is called Crook's Needle, and it's named after a woman named Huldah Crooks, affectionately known as Grandma Whitney. She climbed it 23 times between the ages of 65 and 91. She also climbed 97 other peaks during this period, so she was a very active climber. And so in 1990, the Day Needle, one of the peaks in the area, was renamed by Congress Crook's Peak. So let's talk about some of the formation of this range. Whitney is at the front of a spectacular array of needles and peaks. It's all part of the Sierra Nevada batholith, which is a gigantic sheet of granite. And because of the fault block tilting that takes place in this area, the entire eastern escarpment of the Sierra is sharp, whereas the western side is not so much. How this happens is kind of like a cellar door. So if I can use my hand and just kind of talk about this as the batholith, this would be the western slope and this would be the eastern side. What happens is it rises up like this. So the eastern slope is not as steep, the western slope is not as steep, but the eastern side becomes quite cliff-like. And combined with glacial movement and river erosion, it's created the dramatic landscape of the eastern Sierra. About the man Whitney himself, it was him and Clarence King who unsuccessfully climbed Whitney from its west in about 1860 or so. King went back for a second attempt, but actually accidentally summited nearby Mount Langley. So in a historical irony, 3 fishermen from the town of Lone Pine actually made the first ascent of Mount Whitney, naming it Fisherman's Peak, but the USGS kept the original name, Mount Whitney. In 1904, residents of Lone Pine built a trail to the summit, and again, 4 days later, the mountain had its first death by lightning strike on the summit. Later on, Gustave Marsh put a shelter on top from the Smithsonian Institute, and that sign you see there is what you'll see outside the building. So it is a very high prominent place, like we already mentioned, and therefore it attracts a lot of weather and lightning nonetheless. So with some of that background information, let's go through some things that it takes to climb Mount Whitney, the tallest peak in the lower 48. The first most important thing is it takes great fitness, lots of cardio for long days in altitude. You also most certainly have to camp up there and carry your weight up pretty high unless you're planning on doing it in one day. And you should know that there are lots of different routes up there. Most of the routes on Whitney are technical routes, which means you'll need ropes and climbing equipment. And you'll need the ability to find your way up those and some climbing ability and skill doing that as well. It's a tall mountain and it's a tall climb, so you do need to train for it. Cardiovascular endurance is going to be the most important, the ability to keep going for about 12 hours. We recommend that you would run, bike, or swim for an hour, 2 to 3 times a week at a minimum baseline, and do that for 1 to 2, maybe 3 months before you attempt Mount Whitney. Or just have that as your normal routine year-round. Because at 14,000, you've got 60% less oxygen, and you will probably experience some symptoms of acute mountain sickness going up Mount Whitney. Of course, there's probably, most of you know, lots of red tape around a mountain this popular. Permits are required year-round, even for day hikes, and that includes the Mountaineers route. Overnight permits are scarce, and they're allocated by lottery starting around May 1st, which goes to the end of October. It is mandatory to carry out all solid human waste, which we'll call WAG bags, and so you should not only have those, but use them while you're up there. And the other routes besides the trail are not on the lottery, so that's an advantage for those of us who are willing or interested to go up something like the Mountaineers route or the other routes I'll discuss tonight. A little bit of an overview here. You'll see this prominent red trail that snakes up through this pretty neat 3D overview is the Mount Whitney Trail. In the valley on the other side here, I'll go to my laser pointer and try out this tech. In this valley over here, this is the North Fork of Lone Pine Creek Valley, and that will take us up to the Mountaineers route, the East Buttress and the East Face, which are over here. A little bit of topographic overview on that section there. You'll see this green route here is the East Face route, and then the red line is the Mountaineers route, and between those two is the East Buttress route. Let's talk about the most popular one first, which is the Whitney Trail. The trailhead is just below 8,000 feet, and the ascent again is about 6,600 feet, and it goes over 10 miles plus. Most people will camp at trail camp, or if they're coming off the JMT, they'll camp at a place called Guitar Lake, which is on the other side, on the western side of the summit. So I'm going to take you through a little bit of the photos of the way up from the trailhead to trail camp. It is a spectacular hike, whether or not you're staying up there, well worth doing almost any time of year. Although the road is closed during the winter, so most people attempt it during summer months. Once you have accomplished your night's stay at trail camp, which can be fairly, there isn't a whole lot of sites there, and it could be cramped. It might also be quite cold. But the next day, for most folks, you'll start up from trail camp through the infamous 90-plus switchbacks all the way to a junction point called Trail Crest. Here's the where you came from. This is Keeler Needle, Crooks Needle, and beyond. So there's a lot of terrain to traverse. The other route that a lot of people like to know about is the Mountaineers route. This is a route that should not be attempted by people who don't have some experience peak bagging or scrambling. Occasionally you will have to rappel on this route, or put in protection and or use ropes, or all three. So be prepared for that. It's not really a substitute for the trail. It's not a very difficult technical route, but there are some people who get in trouble there almost every year. I call it the other route. It does start the same trailhead, but it goes most typically up to Upper Boy Scout Lake, where you'll camp. That's at about 10,000 feet or so. And it's also the same amount of ascent, of course, because it starts at the same trailhead, but it's class 3 and class 4, depending on exactly the way you finish it up. I think it's best done with snow on it to minimize rock fall and crowds, so I think the best month to do this route is actually right now, which is April. Up through that point to July, it's very pleasant. There are some interesting things about this route. It is an established trail, but it wasn't really one that was built to accommodate large crowds. So it goes, winds back and forth across the creek. It goes, to avoid heavy brush, it goes up on some ledges called the Eberspacher ledges, and goes by, up until midsummer, it goes by a frozen waterfall called Thor Falls at the base of Thor Peak on its way up. So there's some very interesting scenery there that's quite different than the type you'd get on the trail. This is a picture of Upper Boy Scout Lake, probably around August or so. You'll see the flanks of Mount Russell right over here. And the trail actually goes left from this point on summit day. Up around to some slopes at the base of the north face, at the base of the east face rather. This is where Iceberg Lake is approximately. It's out of camera view here. And then you're going to be heading up the chute, which is this prominent snow finger there. If the chute has good snow coverage, you'll make good progress. Otherwise, you'll have to watch out for rock fall danger from your own party, probably, and the party above you. The chute takes you directly to an amazing balcony at 14,000 feet. So this is what it looks like looking down the chute. From the top of the chute, this is very likely what you'll see. This is what's called the North Gully. It's the last 500 feet. It terminates on the summit plateau, but not on the summit itself, from which you have to walk a little further. And this section that this climber has gone through at this point is probably the steepest part. If this is a little unnerving for you, there is a rappel area right here off to the left, a large flake that's usually slung there. But to bring your own gear to sling it and bring your own rope. You can do it with a 30-meter rope. This is probably earlier in the year. This is the North Gully of the summit. The plateau that you come out on is right about here at 14. So this is the last 500 feet. If you slide uncontrollably down the chute, you'll go at least another 1,000 feet down to the bottom here, and there have been some injuries and fatalities. So if you're climbing on snow in the North Gully, make sure that you know what you're doing and you're prepared to self-arrest. Another of my favorite routes would be the East Buttress. This is an alpine rock adventure of the highest type, probably one of the best alpine routes in the United States, definitely in Sierra. It's listed variously from 5.6 to 5.8. It is grade 3 because there's lots of pitches and you climb about 1,000 feet, so it's spectacular climbing on amazing granite with a incredible view from 13.5 right to the summit. You get to top out on the summit. You could do it in as little as 6 if you're willing to scramble some of the lower pitches, but most people do it between 7 and 9 pitches. Most of the pitches are around 5.6, but some are 3rd and some 4th. Be prepared to move quick and start early and climb fast. Here's a few pictures of what it looks like. This would be the approach up to pitch 3 here, which we call the first tower. Then another more prominent location is the Pee-wee Pillar, and then that takes you up to the final pitches. The last couple of pitches to the summit are 3rd, 4th class. Here's looking down on the lower half of the buttress from the top of pitch 4, and looking up at the Pee-wee Pillar from the top of pitch 4. So this is a little less than halfway up the route. Even though it is very straightforward finding your way up the buttress, it does feel like you get kind of lost halfway up the route in a sea of granite, so make sure that you've studied the landmarks really well. Another classic is the east face of Mount Whitney, which is a couple numbers lower than the East Buttress. Most climbs, most of the time it's listed as between 5.5 and 5.7. It links up features that have immense exposure and minimal difficulty, and kind of links them together on a beautiful little tour up that side, and also ends on summit. The most popular part of it is the Fresh Air Traverse, this section here, and the view from that location is something like this. Quite refreshing. Hence the name. About, hey, I don't know, 500 to 800 feet of fresh air below you. So those are some of the more classic ones. And not to be outdone, however, is the North Face routes, which definitely do not receive very much attention, but they can be done from the Arctic Lake direction. And by God, what's the name of that mountain? I think it's Mount Hale that's north of there. The the chute on the Mountaineers route is about here. I'll keep my little laser pointer on that. So these other routes all end up on the summit plateau, but just come from a more remote direction. As you can see, they're mostly class 3 with some various low class 5 scrambles, mostly up rock ribs. So there's the routes for Mount Whitney. It's prudent for us to talk a little bit about some of the clothing and equipment that you'll need to attempt it. And this, of course, is dependent upon the time of year you go and the sort of route that you attempt. But generally speaking, you're going to need something that allows you to deal with various changing weather conditions like you would on all mountains. So you want breathable layers and storm layers on the outside and insulating layers in the middle. You're going to need a specific equipment for camping in the mountains, probably designed for backpacking or mountain climbing itself. And you'll need specific equipment. If there's any sort of snow out there, you'll need either spikes or crampons or a mountain axe, etc. Here's the clothing materials that we recommend that you use, none of which are cotton. We also recommend this setup for your body, mostly focusing on giving you multiple options for your extremities, your hands, your feet, and your head. You need at least 2 to 3 layers for those. Let's look at your clothing real quick. This is pretty basic outdoor information, but it's worth reviewing. Your first layer should be a breathable wicking, there we go, a breathable wicking base layer that allows moisture to escape and should be thin and possibly might even have a couple pieces like a short sleeve and a long sleeve. And then you're going to need insulating water resistant mid layers. Insulation is more important than water resistance, but they should also, their function is to hold in heat so that you can maintain a comfortable temperature inside of your clothing near your skin. And then you'll probably want a storm shell. You'll definitely need to carry it with you. That should be water resistant and windproof. It's important to bring probably 2 pair of socks. You want light gloves and maybe another pair of heavier gloves. You're definitely going to want some high quality glasses or goggles. And don't forget your warm hat. Whether you decide to call it a toque or a watch cap or a toboggan or stocking cap, it's all up to you. For socks, liners, and gaiters, we have a couple brands that we're recommending here that we offer as part of, for members who are part of Mountain Ascent. You can get a significant discount on all of these items through our retail partner, Bobcats Outdoor. But wherever you get them, these are the sorts of things you'll need to have. 2 pairs of socks, preferably wool. If you decide to go with liners, make sure they're thin. And gaiters are quite useful to have most of the time. Even if there isn't snow, they'll keep scree out of your boots. Base layers, again, we want quick drying, thin wool or synthetic blends. Wool, if you can acquire that, is preferred over polypro because it performs better and doesn't smell as quickly. 1 or 2 pair of underwear. You may also need to think about having a long sleeve, maybe a tall base layer that zips, mix and match with a thin short sleeve. For mid layers, you can do lots of different things here, but fleece is one, soft shell is probably a better choice. You could even use synthetic or down thin layers here. Top and bottom is important. Most folks use soft shell or nylon type pants to be in the mountains, and that's a great fit. That's a great pick. For your shell jacket, you'll need something that is compact, has a hood, is water resistant, and if you're going to be wearing helmet, should be helmet compatible. It'd be great to have pants that are fully side full zip all the way down from the top to the bottom. And there's some great brands there to pick up that gear. Another thing that you'll want besides your warm hat is what's pictured here. This is a balaclava, or at least something that'll go around your neck and keep the back of your head warm and protect your face from wind and cold. You may also want a brimmed sun hat. For glasses out there, we recommend something that's polarized and possibly photochromatic, but definitely with 100% UV protection. If you're going to be in a lot of snow, it's nice to have some side shields. Occasionally, you're going to need goggles on Mount Whitney. There's a lot of wind up there. I've been on the summit quite a few times and have been surprised to find we encountered hail and wind and snow and rain. All of these sorts of conditions have happened in the summer, and low temps around freezing. So goggles might be needed. For your hands, the main thing there is really just to bring two: a thin pair of gloves that have good dexterity, and something that's warmer and thicker and probably longer for nighttime or manipulating ropes or ice axes in the snow. Possibly waterproof if you run cold. Possibly mittens that are waterproof if you run cold. Some other considerations that we recommend are a big parka that fits over everything. This can help keep you warm at camp at night and or in your sleeping bag. We'd focus on making most of your clothing soft shell rather than fleece. You don't need to have waterproof stuff. Water resistant is often very good, if not adequate, unless you're in an actual raining downpour. And don't forget to bring things that are windproof. That can be very, very useful. A little bit of equipment we'll run through real quick. Recommend a 40-liter climbing pack if you can fit all of your stuff into that. That might be tough, so try to keep your stuff in at least a 50. We do recommend a 4-season tent with guy lines properly guyed out, a sleeping bag rated to 15 degrees or warmer, and a powerful stove, probably white gas or canister, with a pot and a lid. You'll probably need insulated water bottles because it may get cold up there, possibly down near freezing or below. Trekking poles are really useful to go up and down trails, whether you're doing technical climbing or not. And a shovel, altimeter, and a GPS should be carried by parties anytime that there's even a slight chance of snow, or you're going to be camping or moving in snow. Here's a couple pack types that you might want to consider. We're looking for kind of a weekend light frame type pack that'll carry your gear for 2 to 3 days. So typical would be 40 to 55 liters. Anything more than that, you may be bringing more than you need. If you're going on a technical route, it should be a climbing pack, and here's some of the features that we're looking for there. You can probably get away with a down sleeping bag on Mount Whitney unless the weather's looking to be wet. Synthetic would work just as well, but it's not as compressible. However, it's probably more affordable. You can probably get away with a single layer mat, like a blow-up or an Ensolite mat. But if you're going anytime in the shoulder seasons, like in fall or spring, a bivy sack and possibly a liner or a second mat would be recommended. For tents, again, we are recommending 4-season tent because of the wind out there, but they don't have to be necessarily heavy. You can go with possibly a single wall tent. You could also go with a bivy, but whatever you bring, make sure that it has a low profile, it's strong, can withstand wind, and that you can guy it out. Mostly we'll be using rocks to guy them out because there's not much in the way of trees up there. For stoves, if you're with a large group, we'll recommend white gas because it burns hot to the last drop, and you can, it won't be affected by cold and altitude. Possibly your bottle stove would. At elevations above 10,000, they lose their power, and as your compressed gas drains, it also loses its BTU output. But they are very convenient and they're lightweight, so it's kind of a trade-off. For food and water, make sure you've got the capability to filter water that you pull off the land at Mount Whitney. You probably cannot carry enough for your entire trip up and down if you're staying overnight, so you'll need to boil or filter that for sure. And most people are going to bring dehydrated food because it weighs less. Or you could do it yourself. You can buy the freeze-dried variety. Or there's also some great supermarket options out there. Water is one of the things that people usually underestimate in the dry, hot Sierra. They don't bring enough and they don't drink enough. So make sure that you're hydrating with at least 4 liters a day to keep yourself up and running. But only carry one of them. Some other things you'll need for adventures of this type. These are all a part of the recommended 10 essentials list. A map and compass, make sure everybody has those and knows how to use them. Everyone should have a headlamp and probably a backup headlamp with batteries in it. Snow shovel per party, stuff sacks to keep your things organized, water bottles plural. You'll need to have the capacity to carry 2 or 3 liters, but outside of one hard-sided 1-liter bottle, I think a collapsible 2-liter bottle is best choice. Definitely bring sunscreen and use it. Probably some other items like for your lips. Make sure that you don't forget that spoon when you go up there, and plan accordingly with your groups so you have dense, high-calorie food that'll keep you going on the trail. You'll need a knife and a lighter for each person, also a watch, probably an altimeter if you can arrange it. Your camera is a great idea. You definitely don't want to miss out on the scenery up there. Water purification for your team, or at least each tent group. A first aid kit per party, and if you wish to, you can bring a cell phone, although I'll tell you that cell phones don't have coverage all the way on the route up and to beyond Mount Whitney. On the summit, you can sometimes get coverage. Certain places that have prominent views, direct line to the valley, you can sometimes get coverage, but don't count on it as a way to summon help. For climbing gear, you'll definitely want a mountain axe on Mount Whitney. It's very useful in lots of situations up and down the trails and possibly on the route. You'll want stiff waterproof mountaineering boots with gaiters for sure. Whether you go with winter type variety or you go with something that's more three-season, it'll depend on the route you're climbing. Take steel crampons. There's a lot of rock up there, and even in the winter, there'll probably be exposed rock you'll have to traverse, so aluminum crampons will not work. Take a hard shell mountaineering helmet that can withstand multiple hits, because there's definitely rockfall on Mount Whitney pretty much everywhere. And depending on the route, you're going to need harness, ice tools, snow and ice pro, and probably a thin diameter rope unless you're doing something really serious. For footwear, we'll recommend that unless you're doing a winter climb, you're going to want a three-season boot, like something like this with a 3/4 length shank that's crampon compatible. Whether you have an insulating midsole or 2 or 3 eyelets over the ankle will depend on how much warmth you need and how much stiffness you desire. Most of the time you can get a boot that is just a step up from a hiking boot, and that'll work on most of the routes. You may also need to bring rock shoes or approach shoes on some of those routes like the East Face and the East Buttress. If you're going in winter or skiing, you're going to need to take plastic mountaineering boots, because the weather and the snow load up there can be horrendous depending on the time of year. For the other climbing gear that you're going to be carrying with you, for that climbing you're going to be carrying with you, here are some brands that we recommend, and all of these are carried by Bobcats and are time-tested, proven sorts of equipment. Here's some of our recommendations for crampons, mountain axes, ice tools, and trekking poles. It's important to get stuff that's durable and versatile. Those are the 2 most important factors. For your climbing gear, you probably, unless you're doing, again, a very technical route, you're probably not going to need a fully featured climbing harness, so you can get away with a mountaineering style harness that's lightweight and compact. Definitely make sure that you bring a plastic 2-layer helmet that has both foam on it and a hard shell exterior. Depending on your route, your ropes may need to be at least 50 meters, but you can get away with shorter ropes on routes like the Mountaineers route, or if you're planning to do a running belay, you might be able to get away with a shorter rope. And consider using a rope that's as thin as you can get, because hauling it up 6,000 feet is no joke. So get a thin rope that still meets your needs. And a couple runners, cord, and webbing per person on the route to be prepared for any rescue situation. That's just good practice anywhere. For hardware and pro, we recommend, if you're on a technical route, you're carrying 3 to 4 locking carabiners. Probably some of them should be motor hitch compatible. Quite a few should be wide mouth so you can clip a lot of gear. Bring 10 to 15 wire gate carabiners for your team and runners that go with those. And whether or not you're on a snow route, you may need to bring snow stakes. Those are probably going to be more useful than ice screws, unless you're going to actually be at Thor Falls climbing ice. For the rest of the hardware and pro, if you do anticipate you're going to have ice, you may not need to bring that many. You could bring probably some stubby ones. There isn't a whole lot of ice up there. Mostly it's snow, and there's plentiful rocks, so I would focus on bringing rock gear. Because it's granite, you're going to have a lot of parallel-sided cracks, so a lightweight rack of stoppers or hexes might be pretty good, or something pretty versatile like camp tri-cams. If you're going to bring active rock pro, there's plenty of choices here. Bring something that will meet your needs without being overly heavy. Probably you won't need to bring much more than 8 to 12 pieces of active pro. Well, you guys, I hope this information was useful for you. Mountain Ascent Association is headquartered in Sacramento. We run trips all over California, the United States, and even across the world, ranging from gym climbs to weekend routes.